A woman stepped into a saloon where the whole town had fallen silent. A gun on her hip, her son's death in her heart. And she asked just one question: "Which one of you killed my son?" From that moment on, nothing was ever the same. This is a story of true justice, silent resistance, and the unstoppable strength of a mother. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. As the first light of morning drifted like a thin mist over the earth, a single hoofbeat echoed in the distance. The road was rocky and winding, but the woman sat tall on her horse. Her face was cracked by the wind, her hands stained yellow with rope marks. Her name was Helena Kraus. Her eyes were gray like the eyes of someone silent at a funeral. They didn't speak, but they said everything. She had been on the road for 14 days. No letters, no clues. Just a lock of curly blonde hair inside a jewelry box. And a handkerchief still faintly stained with blood. Her son Jonas had been found with the first snow at the bottom of a pit, hands tied behind his back, dried mud in his mouth. The sheriff had called it a wild animal attack, but the silence inside Helena screamed otherwise. Jonas was the kind of child who talked to animals and wrote notes to the stars. Violence didn't belong to him. It came from the outside. When Helena reached the edge of town, the sky was still gray. She wore a dull brown coat, an old but well-kept pistol on her hip, and a spiked rifle strapped to her back. But the heaviest thing she carried was in her chest, the absence of justice. Without dismounting, she asked a child, "Is there still a saloon here?" The kid saw the storm in her eyes and nodded before running off. When she pushed open the saloon doors, the air inside shifted. Laughter stopped mid-breath, a glass fell and shattered. Helena's footsteps echoed on the wooden floor like an alarm. Everyone turned, but no one stepped forward. She stood in the center, hands near her gun, but not touching it. "Someone here killed a child," she said. Her voice wasn't loud or soft, but it carried death. "And I'm here because there's still one question buried in Jonas Kraus's grave. Who did it?" The silence in the saloon didn't break, it thickened. Only one man chuckled. He was young, a fresh shaving cut on his cheek. "Plenty of kids have died around here, ma'am," he said. "Are we supposed to draw a gun for each one?" Helena walked, step by step, until she stood in front of his table. She pulled out a locket. The chain was still stiff with dried mud. This was around Jonas's neck. The chain wasn't broken, which means someone put it on after they dumped him in the water or after they pulled him out. Then she leaned in, close to the man. "There's a lie here, dark as the dirt under your fingernails. And I came because silence is now a sin." At that moment, someone else walked in through the saloon's back door. A tall man in a black overcoat. His name was Adrian Mahler. Helena had met him on the road. He hadn't asked questions, and he hadn't offered comfort. But one day, when Helena had fallen and hurt her ribs, he'd sat her against his tent and simply said, "Justice doesn't always speak. Sometimes it waits." Like a shadow. The people in the saloon recognized his silence too. Men like him didn't need to talk, their presence was the message. Helena stepped back, scanning each man one by one. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "They left me alone when I buried Jonas. No priest, no friend, not even a sheriff. So now, I'll remember no one. I just want the truth to speak. And if someone stays silent, not even the sky will judge them. But I will." Then, a chair creaked. An old man stood, his face carrying the dust of years and shame. I heard something that night," he said. "Jonas's scream, and then the sound of horses. There were 3 of them." The saloon dimmed, but the shadows didn't shift. Because something had begun. A town, a mother, a silence. And Helena Kraus didn't just want justice. She wanted to look truth in the eye, no matter the cost. When Helena stepped out of the saloon, the day was bright like glass, but the air still trembled. The sun couldn't warm what had happened because the silence hanging over the town still hovered like a thick fog. The table, glass, and chairs left behind still whispered the echo of the words they had witnessed into the walls. But she walked without slowing her steps because each one was taken with the weight of an oath as heavy as graveyard soil. Adrian followed a few steps behind, not saying a word. His presence felt like a shield, but the burden Helena carried was a loneliness sharper than any blade. The sheriff's office, like the other buildings, had peeling plaster and windows dulled by years of dust. When she pushed the door open and stepped inside, Sheriff Mason Roth was half reclined in his chair, smoking his pipe. His eyes froze when he saw Helena. Then he sat up with a deep sigh. "I heard," he said, "what you said in the saloon." Helena didn't respond. She walked over to the window and watched the birds outside flutter nervously in the open space. "The day I buried my son, you called it fate. But fate doesn't begin when someone ties your child up, it begins when you try to forget." Mason put out his pipe, his voice somewhere between defense and threat. "There's no evidence. Your boy was alone, found on the rocks. That's what everyone says." Helena turned her head. "It's easy to hide behind what everyone says, Mason. But what if everyone's wrong? What if the town is protecting someone because they have a powerful last name?" She placed Jonas's locket on the desk. "Whose breath is in this blood? If you can't say, who will?" Just then, the door opened again. This time, it was the old man who had spoken in the saloon. His name was Friedrich Beck. The shaking in his hands came not from guilt, but from the weight of the past. "I heard Jonas's voice that night," he repeated. "But that's not all. There's more." Mason flinched. "Beck, not now, Dash. Now is exactly the time," Helena said. "The time for silencing the past is over. Now we have to listen." Beck didn't look away as he continued. "There were 3 riders. One was Clay Heler. I don't know the others, but I saw the symbol on their horseshoes. It belongs to the Heler ranch." Helena felt her chest tighten. Clay Heler, the name she had only heard in whispers. The man the sheriff avoided eye contact over. The man people spoke of with lowered voices. A land baron who ruled over his father's estate, giving loans to workers only to enslave them with their debts. "Why didn't you say something?" Adrian asked quietly, his first words. Beck looked down. "I was scared. Clay's father runs everything around here. The sheriff's pay, the grocer's shelves, the town's backbone." Just then, the door opened once more. This time, a woman entered, her apron still dusted with flour. Anna Weber, the town's baker. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "I heard something too," she said. "Last week, Caleb, the boy who works at the Heller stables, came to the bakery. He was drunk, talking to himself. He mentioned Jonas, about how he fell in the water, and how no one tried to grab him." Helena turned to her. "Where's Caleb now?" Anna swallowed. "He usually sleeps behind the stable. He doesn't like the bunkhouse. Quiet kid, but he was scared. I looked him in the eyes, he was hiding something." Helena turned her gaze to the sheriff. "Where were you while all these witnesses stayed silent?" Mason Roth stood up, his voice rough and cracked. "I'm a father too, Helena. But this town has stood on silence for years. Now you're here tearing down the walls. Because there's a child buried beneath those walls," Helena said. When the sheriff said nothing, Adrian stepped toward the door. "Then we're leaving, headed to the Heller ranch. Caleb will talk. If not tonight, then when the sun rises." Helena put the locket back into her pocket. As she turned to leave, she looked over her shoulder. This town will either speak the truth or be buried with it. When they stepped outside, the sun had already dipped low. The sky was gray like a tombstone. The wind dragged dry weeds across the ground, dust curling around Helena's dress. But she didn't flinch, because now she wasn't alone. Behind her was a town aching for justice. Ahead of her was a reckoning buried in silence. And Helena was only just beginning to uncover it. As night fell, the sky had turned a shade of gray that leaned toward purple. Helena and Adrian followed the winding path toward the ranch. The horses were quiet, the ground soft. Shadows stretched long, and every crack carried by the wind made it feel like someone was following them. But Helena's mind wasn't filled with silence anymore, it echoed with the voices she had started to hear. Every confession, every eye contact was another nail driven into the wall around her son's death. The truth was taking shape, rising from beneath a silence built on fear, now beginning to crack. The Heller family ranch was tucked into the curves of low hills. Behind barbed wire fencing stood a large house with no lights on and some old barn structures. Helena remembered that Caleb usually slept behind the barn. As Adrian tied his horse to a tree, Helena quietly made her way toward the barn. Moonlight filtered in through the broken parts of the roof. The barn smelled of hay and old sweat. Rusty tools lined the shelves, and in the corner sat a makeshift bed. And on the edge of that bed, leaning against the wall, sat a young boy. He wore a dusty shirt and a worn-out hat. His eyes gleamed in the dark like a startled deer, afraid, but ready to flee. Helena stopped. Instead of reaching for her weapon, she pressed her hand to her chest, like placing it over her heart. "Are you Caleb?" she asked. The boy lowered his head. I'm nobody, ma'am. Adrian approached from behind but didn't speak. He stood in the shadows, offering comfort by just being there. Helena took a step closer. I'm Jonas Krause's mother. I'm sure you've heard the name. Caleb's eyes flinched for a second. It was like a piece of glass inside him had shifted again. I didn't want to hear, he said. But I did. I tried to silence most of it inside. Helena crouched, resting her hands on her knees. Did staying silent protect you? The boy shook his head. Every night, that river flows in my dreams. Red. Jonas doesn't scream. He just stares. He's trying to say something, but no sound comes out. And I'm there frozen. Helena's eyes filled with tears, but none fell. These tears flowed inward now, not outward. What did you see, Caleb? You don't owe me the truth, but you owe it to yourself. And to Jonas. Caleb's voice cracked. Clay had been drinking a lot that day. Logan was with him. And someone else I didn't know. Jonas was on the other side of the fence, looking for something. I think he was collecting rocks. Clay yelled. Said, any kid on my land pays the price. Jonas stepped back, but stayed near the fence. Clay got down and shoved him. Hard. Jonas stumbled. His head hit a rock. Blood came out fast. Then he didn't move. Helena clenched her fist, her nails digging into her palm. And then, Caleb's voice came out like a whispered prayer. Clay panicked. Logan cursed. The other guy ran. Clay dragged the body. I watched, but I couldn't breathe. Then they threw Jonas into the water. They thought I didn't see anything, but I did. I saw everything. Adrian stepped forward silently and placed a gold coin in front of the boy. This isn't to keep you quiet. It's because you spoke. Helena stood up. Her voice was firm, but not harsh. Caleb, I know you're scared, but people are finally starting to talk. Tomorrow, we'll go to town. You'll need to say this there, too. Caleb nodded. If I keep carrying this secret, I'll bury myself. I'll come tomorrow. Helena stepped outside with, for the first time, a real glimmer of hope in her eyes. Outside the barn, the night was darker, but now it was a darkness that had a voice. A place where silence had begun to crack. On the way back, Adrian spoke. Did you see? Even a child can face his conscience. Helena lowered her head. Because he's still a child. Like Jonas. But the others? What have they lost that they stayed silent? Adrian stopped. Tomorrow, some will deny the truth. Some will stay quiet. But a few will stand. Helena touched Jonas's locket. And that's when justice begins. In the middle of the night, a wolf howled in the distance. But this time, Helena didn't feel afraid. Because now, she wasn't alone. And tomorrow would be the day the truth finally spoke. At dawn, before the mountains had even opened their eyes, Helena and Adrian set out, passing by Jonas's grave. The earth still carried the night. The first light of the sun didn't fall on the dusty grass. It hit the determination in Helena's eyes. There was no grief in those eyes anymore. What remained was the final silent lament pressed to a mother's chest, justice or nothing. As the Heler ranch appeared at the end of the road, the atmosphere felt like the calm before a battle. There was no smell of gunpowder in the air, but Helena's heart beat steady and firm, like that of a soldier approaching the battlefield. Adrian stopped his horse. You want to go straight in? He asked. Helena nodded. No more shadows. Now there's a name, and names can't run from a reckoning. When they passed through the ranch gate, they were met with an unexpected sight. Clay Heler was waiting on the porch. He wore a vest with gold embroidery, one hand resting on a gun ready to fire at any second. His eyes seemed to smile, but his hands were nervous. Helena got off her horse, her knees stiff from the cold morning, but her stance unwavering. Adrian followed like a shadow behind her. Clay spoke in a low voice. Woman, I told you before that he got no business with you. Your kid died. That's just the truth of this land, this life. Helena took a few steps closer. Her fingers didn't touch her weapon, but her eyes locked on Clay. This isn't life. This isn't truth. You pushed Jonas. His head hit the rock. Then you threw him in the river. And you came back to this porch like nothing happened. Clay's smile faded. He was just a kid. He stepped on my land without permission. It was an accident. No, Helena said. Her voice was deep and resonant now. An accident carries a conscience. What follows you is fear and lies. When Clay's hand reached for his gun, Adrian stepped forward. His fingers weren't on the trigger yet, but his body language was a clear warning. If you shoot first, you won't be the one breathing last. At that moment, someone came running from beside the barn. An older man with a hard-lined face. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his voice was rough. "Miss Kraus," he shouted. "I saw it too. I saw him push Jonas, then crouch down without even touching him. There was panic in his eyes, but then he did nothing." Clay turned to the man, narrowing his eyes. "William, watch your mouth. This'll burn you too." William trembled, but didn't back down. "It already burned all of us, Clay. This town wears Jonas's blood on its forehead. But I won't stay silent anymore." That's when Helena stepped forward. "Your eyes may stay silent, but everyone else now has a voice. We have witnesses." Caleb talked. Bess talked. And now William too. Clay's hand suddenly went to his gun. But Helena was faster than Adrian. Her gun fired before his, but not at Clay. It hit the porch wood right next to Clay's hand. His weapon fell to the ground. Clay stumbled back, his hand lightly bleeding. His eyes narrowed with fury. "So what now? This is justice? Shooting people?" Helena walked up to him, her gun still in her hand, though she didn't pull the trigger. "This isn't justice, but it's a reckoning. I didn't come here to kill you. I came to strip you bare, in front of everyone, with the truth." Behind them, the ranch workers were beginning to step out from the shadows where they had been hiding in fear. They held no weapons, no courage in their hands, but on their faces, for the first time, something appeared that wasn't guilt. It was confrontation. As Adrian silently lowered his weapon, Helena took one last step toward Clay. "I'm not burying you today. I'm taking you to court, so everyone hears. So your name is carved not just into this land, but into shame." Clay didn't reach for the gun on the ground, because he realized this fight was no longer about weapons. It was about words, witnesses, and confrontations that wouldn't be forgotten. Helena mounted her horse. When Adrian joined her, his eyes still on Clay, Helena spoke. "The judge arrives tomorrow," she said, "and we'll be there, with our truth." Clay said nothing. For the first time, as Helena and Adrian rode off, they left behind a town, and that town could no longer close its eyes. When they reached the edge of town, Helena's exhaustion didn't show in her steps or on her shoulders. Because her fatigue wasn't just of the body, it was the weariness of hearts that had stayed silent for years. What had happened at the Heler ranch had already spread from ear to ear. But this time it wasn't a whisper, it was an echo. Helena wasn't returning to town like a shadow anymore, but like a storm that carried the wind itself. When Sheriff Mason Roth met them, his face was a mix of emotions: fear, regret, and a hint of admiration tangled together. "The judge is on the way," he said. "He'll be here by morning. Get the witnesses ready, gather the evidence. Clay will try to speak." Helena nodded. "Clay can't just talk now. Every word he says buries him deeper." She turned to Adrian. "Where will Caleb stay tonight?" "Upstairs at the inn. His door's locked. 3 men are guarding it. I'll keep my eye on them." "Good," Helena said, "because sometimes the night is more dangerous than the day." As the sun set, the town sank into a strange silence. On the surface, everyone tried to act like it was just an ordinary night, but the lights in the windows stayed on longer than usual. Women put their children to bed early. The men cleaned their rifles. Because Clay Heler never fought alone, he became a real threat when his brother Eric showed up. And Helena knew that. Alone in her small room at the inn, she sat holding the locket, turning it in her hands. Jonas's hair was still curled inside. On the chair by the window lay his last drawing, carefully folded, a fence, a few goats, and in the corner, written in childish handwriting, "These will be ours, Mom. I promise." Before closing her eyes, she set her gun beside the bed. It was past midnight. The wind had stopped. Not a sound until the distant hoofbeats began. Adrian's shadow passed first across the window, then the door. Helena was already standing, gun in hand. "How many?" she asked. "4 riders. Quiet. They're not here to fight. They're here to burn." Helena muttered. "Clay can't speak, but his brother comes to silence others." When they reached the front of the inn, 3 riders emerged from the darkness. The 4th was circling around the back of the building. Eric Heler stood at the front. His black coat blended into the night, and from the bottle in his hand, he poured something onto the ground: kerosene. "This building," he said quietly, "should burn with all its rotten lies." Helena stepped forward. "What would burn here isn't lies, it's the denial of the past. And this town won't stay silent anymore." Eric laughed. "The town? They just watch. In the end, fire wins, not cowards." Adrian stepped forward, gun raised, his eyes locked on Eric's hands. Try lighting that fire and you'll be the first to fall." The tension was sharp enough to cut the air. Helena saw the darkness on Eric's face. The arrogance that Clay had lost had turned into rage in Eric. He wasn't a man who came to burn, he was a man who only existed through burning. And in that moment, a voice rang out through the night. "Enough!" A rifle appeared in the window. It was Caleb. "I won't stay silent anymore," he said. "Even if I burn, even if you die, there's one more voice now that'll speak for Jonas." Eric's expression faltered. One of the riders behind him pulled back. Another reached for his weapon. Adrian fired first a warning shot, straight into the ground. But it was enough. The riders retreated. Eric looked at Helena one last time. "Tomorrow in court, all you'll hear is lies," he said. "But even that lie will burn you." "I've already burned," Helena replied. "But now, Jonas's grave is touched by light, not smoke." By the time the first light of morning arrived, the weight over the town hadn't lifted, but everyone was awake. The sheriff was preparing to greet the judge. The witnesses were lining up. Helena put on her black coat and placed Jonas's drawing into her bag. Adrian checked his rifle one last time. The courthouse wasn't used for the hearing, the saloon had been chosen instead. Because this time, justice would echo in the very place where the most sin had been committed. As the sun slowly rose over the town, the saloon woke to the busiest morning it had ever seen. Normally filled with drunken laughter and the sound of cards slapping on wood, the wooden floor now held only silence and footsteps. Chairs had been lined up, the central table turned into a judge's bench. On top of it sat a ledger, a seal, and Judge Henry Bauer carrying the weight of years on his shoulders. When Helena walked in, everyone turned to look at her, but there was no blame in their eyes anymore. No curiosity. There was respect. Adrian stood behind her, and Caleb, William, Anna, even other faces from the town who had once been swallowed by silence had gathered. The silence now wasn't from fear, but from mouths waiting their turn to speak. The judge looked at Helena first. "State your name and why you're here." Helena stood tall. "My name is Helena Kraus. A boy was buried in this town, but his grave wasn't covered by death, it was covered by silence. Today, I didn't bring a weapon to this table, I brought a name, Jonas Kraus. And whoever silenced him, today I will be his voice in front of everyone." The first witness was Caleb. His hands trembled, his voice shook, but he spoke. He told in detail what he had seen that day, who had pushed Jonas, and what he had heard. Then came William. "I watched," he said. "I stayed silent because Clay's last name was stronger than any wall. But today, it's not walls that should speak, it's our conscience." Anna Weber spoke in a whisper. Bess, while wringing a handkerchief. Each of them said that Jonas's death had broken their own silence. With every step, every word, the room slowly abandoned Helena's loneliness. Finally, Clay Heler was brought in. The bandage on his arm still fresh, the arrogance in his eyes now cracked. "Lies," he said. "They're all speaking out of fear. That woman tricked them. She's a threat." The judge looked over his glasses. "Do you have any claims? Witnesses? Evidence?" Clay went silent. No one spoke for him. Not even his brother Eric had returned to town. The judge nodded. "This court is not a place for punishment. It is a place for record. I cannot say that justice has been fully served today, but let it be recorded. The death of Jonas Kraus was not an accident. It was due to intent, or at the very least, neglect and cover-up. Clay Heler will be held under supervision until his court date. The trial will be taken to a higher court." Helena lowered her head. It wasn't a smile, but with the deep breath she drew in, she felt something close to closure. That evening, Helena placed a stone at the cemetery near the entrance to town. The stone was handmade. On it, Adrian had carved the words, "Jonas Kraus' son, who played with the wind, who did not silence the truth." Helena knelt before the grave and placed her son's sketchbook, the one with the goats on it. Then she pulled a handful of seeds from her pocket to plant near the fences. Jonas's dream, a fence, a few goats, a garden far from silence. Adrian stood beside her. "Is it over for you?" he asked. Helena stood. Her coat shimmered lightly in the sunlight. "Justice never ends," she said. "But grief is no longer a weight I carry, it's an echo. And I live with that echo." Adrian nodded. "Then I'll keep building the fences." Weeks later, the town had changed. Children played in the streets again. A picture of Jonas's goats was hung behind the grocer's counter. A new bread recipe had appeared at the bakery named Helena's Bread. Sheriff Roth spoke less, but listened more. And Helena, as she finished the fences, was drawing a line not just for her own son, but for all the forgotten children of the town. And every morning, by the fence, there was a little goat watching her. A small sign had been nailed beside it, Jonas. And one morning, the wind gently blew. Among the fences, Helena's voice was heard. She wasn't yelling or crying. She was simply murmuring something, maybe to her son, maybe to every mother who had finally found her place in this world. You hear me now, don't you? Justice wasn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it was as simple as a fence. And sometimes one mother's resistance became an entire town's awakening. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button, but your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.